In my opinion, this bill is headed to failure. There should be no drama. There should be no confusion. Now, let's be clear. This bill, I am convinced, is going to pass the U.S. Senate. In fact, I think it's going to pass the U.S. Senate with a substantial margin. In all likelihood, near the end of this process, there will be an amendment or two directed at border security that the American people will be told, okay, this finally puts teeth into the border security provisions. I hope those representations prove true. But regardless of what happens on that, I believe the votes are already pre-cooked that this bill is going to pass the U.S. Senate. But absent major revisions, absent revisions along the lines of the amendments that I introduced in committee and intend to introduce on the floor again, this bill House.
All right, what he said was, it was hard to hear, this bill will not pass the House. Welcome back to the Steve Malzberg Show, folks. That was Senator Ted Cruz on the floor of the Senate yesterday as debate has started. Amendments are starting to be offered to the Comprehensive Immigration Reform Bill as put together by the so-called Gang of Eight. Joining us now to talk about that bill is David Bier. He's Immigration Policy Analyst at the Competitive Enterprise Institute. David, how are you, sir?
Great. Thanks for having me on.
Well, it's my pleasure. Okay. Your expertise and what you've written about and have talked about at length is the guest worker program, the guest worker aspect of this. Tell us exactly what that means. Are we talking about low-level workers and high-skilled workers being admitted into this country?
That's right. This bill would increase the guest work visas for both high and low-skilled workers, whether agriculture or other temporary low-skilled workers, or also for high-skilled workers. You're talking about tech workers and, finance analysts and that sort of thing. So both of those things, I think, are good things. I don't think the bill, however, goes far enough to ultimately eliminate the illegal immigration problem, or really to make our economy substantially more competitive internationally.
Well, okay. How do you explain to people, and we've had several African-American clergy and leaders sign a letter saying that they object to what this bill will do to the job situation, which is already dire in minority communities. How do you explain to people when the unemployment rate is what it is? We have a measly number of jobs being created each month, and the reason the rate isn't higher is because people are dropping out of the workforce. How do you get them to accept the fact that we need more workers to take the low-end jobs and the high-end jobs in this country, that people that aren't here yet, that you need to bring in to do this?
Well, at the high end, most Americans aren't competing with people with master's degrees. A majority of Americans don't even have a bachelor's degree. So for the majority of workers, the high-skilled workers are not competing with them. And for those who do face competition from these workers, ultimately they benefit because the extent to which you allow in other workers, whether they're engineers or whether they're healthcare workers, I mean, we all use other services, right? So as much as we would like to have our little monopoly and not allow any new workers into that particular area of the economy, it's better if we allow open competition because we can buy goods and services from the other workers that we do allow in to other industries, right? So that lowers prices and benefits us in the long run.
Yes, so you're saying
it's a difficult thing to explain to people because the economy is not as simple as they seem to think it is. But it is certainly helpful to people who are trying to buy goods and services if we do not artificially keep prices high by eliminating labor sources.
Okay, so you're telling me that we don't have enough workers in this country, and if we allow more workers into this country, and especially on the low end, then prices will go down? Is that what you're telling me?
Of course. If you increase the number of goods and services being provided in an economy, that lowers
But people
prices,
aren't hiring people now. They're laying people off. They're not hiring. So what good is it going to be bringing more people into the country competing for jobs with people who aren't getting hired now?
Right. So if you allow the economy to naturally operate, when you disrupt the flow and movement of people or goods and services throughout the economy, it creates disruptions that ultimately harm people regardless of where they are in the skills spectrum. So if you prevent people from moving into the United States or from moving between states for that matter, because this argument could just as easily apply to Californians moving to Texas, for example.
No, I think it's legal and illegals coming from other countries. I don't think it's people.
Well, the dynamics doesn't matter. I mean, where they're coming from is irrelevant. It doesn't matter whether they're coming from outside the United States or between states, because whether they're coming from outside the United States or between states, the dynamics of the situation economically is exactly the same. They're just people moving from one place to another. And so if you're going to say that this applies to foreign workers, you have to say the dynamics apply the same, economically speaking, to domestic workers. And we know that that it's better if you allow workers to move throughout the country because they fill needs at particular moments in time. And so they move, immigrants move quickly to fill needs around the economy, and that produces goods and services that result in complementary jobs, and that ultimately helps the economic.
All right, but I'll ask you again, and I don't want to get into, I mean, nobody's saying that we shouldn't allow workers to move from New York to Nebraska or vice versa, and that might be the same issue economically, but certainly it clouds the issue because we're talking about workers who, for the most part, either don't belong here now legally or aren't here yet in the country at all. So, again, I'll ask you, if there aren't enough jobs to go around now for the people who want them in this country, why do we need more workers vying for those same jobs with American citizens when American citizens are unemployed or have given up at a horrific rate? Why more people competing that aren't here yet competing, or that are here and don't belong here and are going to be legitimized? Well, how does that help the person in this country looking for a job?
Right. So you're looking only at the supply side of the equation.
I'm looking at people who can't find jobs.
Sure. I know you want to make it as simple as possible for people. But if you increase the number of people who come into the country, yes, you're increasing the number of people competing for jobs, but you're also increasing the demand for jobs because these workers create money, create wealth, and then they spend
not if they're not working. Not if they're not working, sir. But
right. But here's the thing: is that these workers are coming for that purpose. They're coming to work. So
but we got millions of people looking for work.
Right. Well, I'm trying to explain why they actually create demand for new jobs. So if you allow an agricultural worker to come in and work in an agricultural job, he spends his wages and he spends his earnings in the United States, and that creates demand for new jobs elsewhere in the economy, better jobs, in fact, because we don't really want, Americans working in agricultural jobs. We want to move them up in the skill spectrum, allow them to work better jobs.
Okay, let me stop you there. When you say
ultimately what's happening,
I understand
in the long term.
Okay, but when you say we don't want people to work in Americans to work in agricultural jobs, are you saying there aren't people to take those jobs now, and the employers who need to fill those jobs have nobody to fill them with? Is that what you're saying? Is that the fact?
Sure, absolutely. In agricultural jobs, it's definitely true that the demand for workers actually is beyond the supply for workers. But even if it wasn't true, it's still better to allow the workers to come into the United States. So the farms are being located here in the U.S. The call centers are located here in the U.S. That the tech companies are located here in the U.S. because they create demand for other complementary jobs related to those industries. And so would you rather have the farms being located in Mexico and Nicaragua, as they currently have been doing for the past several years, or tech companies being located in Canada or India or China? Or would you have them be here and have complementary jobs for Americans based on the jobs created by the foreign workers?
Well, naturally, you want to do something that will create jobs here. I just don't see it. You said even if it were not the case that there weren't enough agricultural workers. So based on the premise that there are enough agricultural workers, by allowing an influx of new potential agricultural workers to come in and compete for those jobs, you're just going to make it harder for the people already here in America to get a job at a time when we're in a crisis.
It's the hardest thing in economics to explain to people.
Well, I understand it, but it doesn't benefit people looking for work.
Well, it's not a. Look, if you increase the supply of workers, it's just like having a baby who grows up and works in the economy. It's the same as any other person. People are not bad for the economy. New people are not bad for the economy. New people from other states are not bad for the economy. New people benefit our economy because they create wealth for Americans. They produce goods and services that make us better off, and that lowers prices, and then their spending that these workers ultimately will have to spend in order to survive ultimately creates jobs in other sectors, better sectors, which is why 90% of Americans aren't working in farms like they were in the 19th century. We have better jobs today because we've grown the economy, and immigrants and free trade across borders is a critically important part of that.
All right. Well, what do you think the prospects are from what you hear of this this bill passing? And if it passes, you've also said that, and I think we started out, and we're talking to David Bier, Immigration Policy Analyst at the Competitive Enterprise Institute. You say that this workers program doesn't go far enough, guest workers. So what are you looking for? What would satisfy you? What would have to be in the bill for you to say this is good?
Right. Yeah. I think what really has bothered people over the last several decades is partly the fact that you have immigrants coming in at all, and you have people who oppose that regardless. But most people in the United States are really opposed to illegal immigration. So one of the things that would be very important to include in this bill is that if illegal immigration continues, that's a sign that the demand for visas is so much higher than the supply for visas that the supply should be increased. It's a market signal, in other words. And so if we created a mechanism in the bill that increased the quota every year in which the illegal immigration continued above the targeted rate that's included in the bill, which is 90% of everyone who crosses the border is apprehended. If that rate is not met, I think the quota should be increased in order to divert future flows of immigrants into legal immigration channels.
All right. Well, I tell you, it's going to be very interesting, and I don't know that it's that hard to explain or grasp. I just think people look at it black and white, as I tend to look at it and say, if people don't have jobs now, putting millions of more workers into the workforce competing for those jobs is not going to make it better or make it worse. But you've done a good job of trying to convince me otherwise, David. Thank you very much for your time.